people, to business owners, and help them prepare to get their businesses ready to sell. So hello, Jim. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you giving us your time.
Well, great to be here, Gary. It's fun chatting about this topic, and I'm happy to dive in.
Well, just start out by just telling us a little bit about yourself. And I know you've been in Nashville a long time, maybe a native. So just tell us about yourself and what it is that you do.
Well, yeah, you said I'm an attorney, which I guess is true. I am an attorney, but I don't practice law. I haven't practiced law in a long, long time. And in fact, I'm a member of the Missouri Bar. But I do M&A consulting work. I help business owners when they're ready to buy or sell a business. I also do some consulting around ownership transitions, helping business owners through problems. Uh, we kind of call it mediation. I'm a Tennessee Supreme Court certified mediator, which means I can come into situations where there are problems, usually around ownership, and we're trying to keep the business healthy and alive while disintegrating, relationships. So I do a fair amount of mediation there. I've been in Nashville 25 years. I moved here when I bought a radio business here. I was an executive at the Walt Disney Company in Orlando. Had a great life, great job, loved what I was doing, loved the company, loved the people. But I had a crazy desire to be an entrepreneur. And through a friend of a friend, I found a radio business that was in trouble in Nashville. And I thought, well, I'll buy this business. Now I didn't know a darn thing about radio. Didn't know how radio works. Had never been in a radio studio in my life, but I bought this radio business, and within a few months after buying it, I had made a couple of more acquisitions. So it became a pretty sizable business before I knew it. And although we had planned when we bought the business to run it from Orlando, which is kind of a crazy thought to have a Nashville business you can run from Orlando, but after a few months, it just got untenable, and we needed to be here, on a full-time basis. So we moved here in 1997. And as fate would have it, within a few months of me moving here, Congress deregulated radio ownership laws. And all of a sudden, my radio properties were worth a lot more money because there's a finite number of radio licenses in the United States. So the deregulation allowed the major groups to start consolidating. So here I had bought 3 radio businesses that were all kind of struggling and consolidated them into one business. And my station values were suddenly substantially more valuable. And although I left the Walt Disney Company because I wanted to be an entrepreneur, I didn't want to be a corporate guy. But lo and behold, I kind of had the old proverbial offer too good to be true. I sold my stations to a company called Salem Communications, publicly traded radio business out of California. And they offered me the opportunity to come in and kind of run their M&A department and help them make acquisitions to broaden their profile. So that's really what got me in the M&A business, was working for Salem. I started there in the year 2000 and did acquisitions for Salem. We made a few divestitures, but primarily acquisitions. And I learned through working saw dozens and dozens of deals for Salem. We ended up making, I don't remember the number, but it was maybe over 20 acquisitions, but saw scores of potential deals. And I really saw business owners poorly served through that process. And some business owners were on their own. And when you're negotiating with an experienced buyer like I was, that's kind of a bad place to be if you're a solo, doing that on a solo basis. Sometimes I saw business owners poorly served by representatives that maybe really weren't as experienced. So a lot of business brokers are the man or woman that sold their business and think they know how to sell your business. Well, that's kind of a foolish concept. So I saw a fair amount of business owners that were poorly represented, and then I saw some business owners that were represented by traditional investment banks, but they weren't quite large enough to get a lot of quality attention. Mm-hmm. So I put all that together and thought, it seems to me to be a niche for business owners that have a business, say between $5 million and $50 million of enterprise value, They're too small for the investment banks to get a lot of quality attention. They're too sophisticated for the kind of the garden variety business broker to be able to handle them. And that's kind of what I decided to do. So after 9 years of working for Salem, I signed a 3-year employment contract and I stayed 9 years. I love Salem, love the people, great company. But we decided to part ways in the end of 2008 when the financial crisis hit. Basically, the financial crisis hit, they were kind of out of acquisition capital, at least for a while. They're obviously back in that business now, but there for a while, everybody kind of slowed down. And I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. If I wanted to be a corporate guy, I would have never left Disney in the first place. So I decided to rejoin, entrepreneurial ranks, and I started Tennessee Valley Group in 2008 with the intention to represent business owners in kind of this area, Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky, Georgia, and that business owner kind of that $5 to $50 million range. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Awesome. When I hear you talking about two different people coming to the table, the one with the most knowledge and experience usually wins.
Always wins.
So, I try to preach and teach.
Funny how that works. Funny how that
knowledge
works.
is power, and this is a free way for business owners to, learn from your experience. And I appreciate that.
Right.
And I find, I don't know about you, I'm sure you could echo this, that there's a lot of misinformation and people get the wrong information from the wrong source, and yet they just accept it as gospel, and it can be misleading.
The number of times, Gary, I have to meet with the business owner and disabuse them of their notions before we even, kind of get serious about the strategy. They've got to unlearn some things.
Right.
But that's, the source of information really is important.
I want to hear stories from you, but I'm going to tell one quickly. I was talking to a business owner, and he said, I wouldn't take less than $5 million for my business. And I said, well, that's great. What does the buyer get? And he kind of went quiet, because he was the business, and so there really wasn't anything to sell. There were no assets. There really wasn't anything to sell because he was it. So, that applies to a lot of small business owners, that they're the ones that make it happen. And without them, there's really nothing to sell.
Right.
What types of companies do you like to work with, whether industry, location, size, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, when I started, I'd had, going back to my years with Disney, and then running my own radio business, and then working for a communications company for 9 years. I had 20 some years there of media experience, so it would have been very natural to become a media guy. But I really wanted to be a generalist. I liked lots of different businesses, just loved the sort of the arena of business. So I didn't want to pin myself to one vertical, which also kind of leads to the geography question, because I really wanted to work with businesses in this area. I traveled a lot in my corporate career, and I kind of was tired of getting on airplanes. So I really chose to focus on businesses that's why I called my company the Tennessee Valley Group, because I kind of wanted to work within the Tennessee Valley area. But as a practical matter, most of my clients have been within a 100-mile radius of Nashville, just as a practical matter. So I like working for manufacturing businesses, distribution companies, business services generally. I've done some healthcare work. So I like being a generalist. The truth of the matter is, Gary, and of course you know this, the process to sell a business is really kind of the same. There's really not a lot of advantage to having deep industry expertise, because the process to sell a healthcare business is the same process to sell a manufacturing business, and then information has been democratized. It's easy to get access to buyers. The days of having a kind of proprietary Rolodex are over with. We all know who the buyers are. We can all reach them, with certain databases. So it's easier to be a generalist today than it would have been maybe 20 years ago.
What's kind of maybe on the smaller side, before you get interested or before you see the bigger buyers get interested, what's kind of a minimum target that a business owner should look for?
Well, it really speaks to the kind of deal they want. If you think about types of I'll put buyers in three categories. You have individual buyers, guys like you and I that say, okay, I want to be a business owner. I say men or women. I don't say when I say guys. I say that holistically. You want to be a business owner, and maybe you've come out of a corporate environment and you don't like your job at this company or that company. I want to be an entrepreneur, much like I was when I was at the Walt Disney Company. So you have individual buyers, and most of these buyers they come with a lot of energy, they come with a lot of experience, a lot of ability, but they don't come with a huge checkbook. So what they generally have to do is come along with SBA financing. Well, by definition, SBA financing is limited to certain sizes of businesses. So if your business is valued at $5 million or below, it will probably almost always go to an individual buyer. And then if it gets over $5 million in valuation, then you've got a chance of an exit with a financial buyer or a strategic buyer. So size of your company will often kind of be the first determining factor in the sales strategy, because the buyer set kind of defines what kind of company that they can look for.
When you're working with businesses, evaluating them or trying to help them sell, I think of things in terms of, I'm a real simple guy. I think in simple terms. I look at things that are like green flags that make it go and red flags that make it stop. What are the types of green flags that you've seen in businesses that make it easier for them to sell and get the value that they're seeking?
Well, I'll answer that question from a red flag standpoint. Those things. That's a great metaphor, by the way. If you don't mind, I might use that. I'll quote you, but that's a great way of thinking about it. The first red flag, and the reference you made earlier is the owner really the business? Just because you have employees and customers and revenue and profit does not mean you have a transferable business. If the business can't sustain itself after the owner walks out the door, you don't have a saleable business. That really is a red flag. That's not even a yellow flag of caution. That is a red flag, and I see that a lot. And even some sizable businesses. I've seen businesses with revenue of $10 million where they're so dependent on the owner that you just can't. It's not sustainable. That's probably the first red flag. The second red flag is and maybe this just goes without saying. Is it profitable? And that seems logical, Gary, but it's important also because a buyer wants to see growth opportunity, and they want to see a business that's got a business model of being able to generate profit that can be more profitable as it grows. And if you don't kind of have a profitable business, then you have to kind of scratch your head and say, well, why would a buyer buy it? So that's a red flag. I'd say the last red flag. I mean, kind of what I mean by red flag is just sort of showstoppers. Like you just kind of have a conversation and say, Mr. Smith or Miss Jones, your business really isn't sellable right now. But the third red flag would be quality of financials. I have, we can talk about, audits, audited financials, reviewed financials, compiled financials. But if you're working a business out of QuickBooks and your checkbook, it's really hard for a buyer to have confidence in the quality of the business. So while that may be, I'll call quality financials a modified red flag because that can be fixed. That's something a business owner can pick up a phone and call a CPA firm and get that resolved. Now it takes months to do it, but it's fixable. But I've been in meetings where I've had business owners pull out the proverbial dress drawer with cash and receipts and go, "This is my financial statement," and that's a red flag.
It is. All those kind of roll into something that, I try to teach where I'm talking to business owners saying the more time and money the buyer has to put into your business to get it where he wants it, the less they're going to pay for you.
Oh yeah,
And the less time and money they put into it, the more value. So you can either do it, you can do it or they can do it. But if they
yeah.
if they
I,
do
I
it,
would
they're not
say
going to pay you for it.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. There is a fourth red flag, and this is maybe I should have said this one first. I had and I'll tell this in the form of a story. I had a lady contact me about selling her company. It was a manufacturing company. And I had her send me the financials, which I typically do. I was just going to get an update on the company and before I meet with her. And it was I don't remember the financials. This was 10 years ago. But it was a profitable business. And I remember thinking this, I think I can sell this. I like the financials and it kind of fit the profile of the company I would want to sell. And I drive down to meet with her. And I kid you not, she had one customer. One customer. And so customer concentration can be a complete showstopper. Kind of the benchmark is you don't want any one customer being more than 35% of your revenue. And to your point, you don't want the buyers to have to do too much work. That's even kind of on the high side. But obviously in her case, we had a very pleasant meeting that said, maybe that customer would want to buy your company.
Right.
That's in terms of perhaps a vertical integration play for them, but no buyer is going to buy your company with this kind of concentration. That's the most extreme example of one customer, but anything over 35% is a red flag.
Well, to your point, and I'll share this. One of the things that I do is business valuations for different reasons. Someone wants to buy or sell something, or has a shareholder dispute. But so I'm signed on to do a valuation for a business, and about 2 weeks later, the owner calls me and says, "We just lost so and so client," and that's. I said, "Okay, what does that mean?" He said, "60% of our revenue." And then he says, "Is that going to impact the value? Is that going to impact the value of the business?" I said, "Yeah, I think so." So it did. I mean, it was huge. Now he was able to overcome it. He didn't had a lot of cash flow, didn't have debt, so he had some. He could buy time with that, right? Till he could recoup that. But for most people, if you lose 60% of your revenue one day, it's going to torpedo the business and certainly not make it viable, transferable, or any of those things. So,
We'll tell you one nuance that's kind of come out of COVID that I don't remember this conversation much before COVID is concentration in your supply chain. That it may not rise to the level of red flag, complete showstopper, but sophisticated buyers are beginning to ask about supply chain, and the same kind of math. If you've got more than 35 or 50% of your product coming from one source, especially if that source is foreign, and especially if it's China, and I'm not talking politically, I'm just talking just logistically and mechanically, that's a real red flag because the stability of supply chain is very much now a due diligence, if you will, factor in business quality.
So I hear you saying diversity both on the revenue side and on the supply side, on both sides. That makes total sense. You've looked at a lot of deals over the years. I'm just asking you to throw out an estimate of deals that do not sell, or that you say, "No, I don't want to take this on for any reason." What would you say that would be?
Well, no, I don't want to take this on. Probably half of the calls I get.
Wow.
Now, some of that is the fact that I should have explained earlier, I'm a solo practitioner by choice. I've managed people my entire business career, and I really have chosen in sort of this last stage of my professional life to not manage people. So I've only got so much time. I mean, I've got to say no just from a time standpoint. So, and I've said no to some quality businesses I just don't have time to handle. I was in an interview last week, being interviewed by a private equity group in Boston about taking on one of their portfolio companies to sell. And we had a real hard heart talk about, do I have the time to do it as a solo practitioner? And so I've got to be conscious of that. So sometimes my no is not a quality standpoint; it's just literally availability standpoint. But there are probably so some of the calls, some of my no's are the business just isn't ready. And I just have to kind of give them. I have to tell them, that, and then sometimes it's just kind of under my radar, and I just don't feel like I can really help them just because it's, I don't have the time to handle everything. Back in my radio days, one of my employees was a guy that was well known in the Nashville music business, and he'd kind of grown up in Nashville country music scene, and he worked for one of the licensing agencies. I think he worked for CSAC, and he said one of the hardest conversations was when you had to tell a songwriter that their baby was ugly. And I always remember that phrase. And sometimes you have to tell a business owner, hey, your baby's ugly. Now, I try to do that in a very measured way, but I've, on the other hand, Gary, I've had some business owners who are very open to that. They say, great, that's why I called somebody like you. Tell me what I need to do. And if you got
Right.
time to fix it, then go for it. That's great.
Right. And I had a client come to me with just that. This was a couple of years ago, and this is a great client actually. Says, I want to exit in X years, and I want to walk away with X, Y dollars net of everything. Now, tell me how to get there.
I
So
love that. I love that conversation. You know what your number is, then you can reverse engineer what that needs to look like.
that's right.
Absolutely.
Only since then he's changed his target and upwards, not downwards. But that's
Wouldn't
okay.
it be, wouldn't it be like in the perfect world? Wouldn't it be great if every business owner had to do that?
Yeah.
You had to at some point you had to sit down and decide how much do you want to exit for, and then reverse engineer what that needs to look like.
So many times they're operating, I'll say, with a blindfold on, and they'll say, well, I want to sell for as much as I can when I can, but that's just a hope. That's not a
Right.
that's
Right.
not a target, and so I
Right.
try to go through that, measuring exactly what they're worth today, getting a number for what they want and when, and then it's just logistics between it's time and distance, right?
It's plug and play. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I love that, and we're having fun with that. Trying to think here. Post COVID, I mean, what are some of the biggest challenges? I mean, I hear people talk about can't find people to hire, having trouble with supply. You hear things like that, or anything else besides that are biggest challenges for business owners today?
Well, clearly the supply chain issue, which we talked about, it was really a serious problem, maybe more so a year ago. But having gone through that, it's really raised it up as an issue. I think that obviously interest rates going up the past 6 months has affected the deal world and affected an interest rate does impact what a buyer can pay, which is kind of goes without saying. So that's slowed things down some. It's affected it's more affected valuations than it's slowed down things. And I think that the other thing, we talk about baby boomer business owners and their preparation to sell. We all kind of lost a couple of 3 years in COVID. So those baby boomer business owners are 2 and 3 years older. So, which gives them maybe less time to do some of the things we were just talking about. I mean, I think I've had a few more stressful conversations post COVID than I had before COVID. Business owners going, I really need to sell, and they don't frame it as though I've lost some options because of time, but that's really what they're saying. And that problem, I guess, gets more acute every day.
It does. We all Father Time's batting 1,000, so we all face that. We all face that dilemma.
Right.
We all
Well
face
said.
that dilemma. I'm going to try to before I summarize some of the things, some of the highlights that I heard you say. Do you have any other particular thoughts or comments specifically for business owners about what they should be looking to do or not do?
Well, I think, the quality of financial information is the easiest thing to fix day one, and to focus to get that fixed. Um, making yourself dispensable, being able to, and sometimes that's actually measured by I tell business owners, take a 2-week vacation and force yourself to not call the office or check your email and see what happens. And by the way, when you have that conversation, you ought to see the pain in their face, which probably tells you everything you need to know. But really work to develop a strong number 2 and number 3 and a management team that can sustain without you. And the other thing, again, some of this is so common sense that I almost feel silly saying it, but buyers will value the company based on historic financials, but they're constantly thinking at the same time, what's the growth strategy here? What do I do with this company? And I really encourage business owners to articulate how to grow the business. And that doesn't mean put more money in marketing. It's really if you had more money coming to the bottom line, or if someone just gifted you money, tangibly, what would you do with it and what impact would it have? It's kind of an if this, then that kind of thought process.
Right.
And I've literally, in writing marketing packages, which in our world is called a confidential information memorandum, sometimes referred to as a CIM, C-I-M. In writing a confidential information memorandum, I will oftentimes literally put that if then this, that strategy in the package to say, okay, Mr. or Miss Buyer, if you do this, then this will happen in terms of the growth. So don't just assume that the buyer is going to have the growth strategy. So really helping the seller think through that. And those are some pretty difficult conversations, because sometimes you kind of get so kind of ingrained in your own pattern, you don't really think about what the growth strategy is, or you just, like I said, you just kind of a throwaway. I just pour more money into marketing. Well, let's be a little bit more specific than that. So if you can spoon feed, with quality financial information, a solid business, and a good management team, and a growth strategy, you're going to get an above market premium. That's just going to happen.
Just speaking to the quality of financials, I've worked in situations where one business A got their P&Ls daily. Okay, now they weren't perfect, but they were usable to help for the owners to manage the business. They knew what their sales were out of the system. They knew what their cost of goods sold was. They knew what their labor was. A lot of the overhead was fixed. They had P&Ls from 5 different locations on a daily basis, due 7 days a week by 10 a.m. That was a given. They had to have them.
Right.
Competitor, on the other hand, kind of old school, shipped all of his information off to his accounting resource, and he got his financials 3 or 4 weeks after the close of the month. That's normal. It happens a lot, but which one has the information,
right
at their fingertips, right?
You look, the key for a buyer is how can you minimize their risk?
Right.
Their ability to minimize risk is their ability to pay you more. It's completely related. And so you go, if I knew nothing else about the business, the customer set, anything, which business offers me, the buyer, less risk?
That's right.
And you go, wow, I think that your first example is a less risky investment.
Well, they ended up selling, for a good multiple. They were happy, set out for a while, then they went right back at it and did something else. I'm going to try to summarize some of the things that we've talked about today coming from you. And for business owners, you want to hear this from someone who's right in the middle of it, and that's Jim Cumbee, okay? First of all, is your business transferable? Second, is it profitable? Are you making money? Do you have quality financial statements? You can throw resources at that, but you got to, and that's a function of people, processes, and technology. Okay. Having the right people, right place, right processes, and everything's a process. Getting quality financials is a process. And then also your customer concentration, either both on the revenue side and on the supply side. So those are some tangible, impactful points I think any business owner can take, whether it's a services related business or you either provide services or you sell stuff, is what I call it, some materials. You know, you got cost of goods sold or cost of service sold. All four of those points are directly applicable, you know, to business, and you can take that and do that. I try to keep these to like a 25-minute-ish type of podcast. That's because that's about as far as my attention span can last, and I want it so somebody can take it and listen to it over lunch. So if you have any other questions about this, first of all, thank you, Jim, for coming and spending time with us today. I know your time is valuable. This is extremely valuable for business owners. If you have any questions for Jim, you can contact him at Jim at tnvalleygroup.com. His website is tnvalleygroup.com. You can find out a lot more information about Jim there. Contact him. Thank you so much for coming. If you have any questions about Leveraging You, you can go to LeveragingYou.com and see the course that I've developed that helps business owners. And we talk about in more detail a lot of the things that we've talked about today. So, again, thank you so much, Jim, for coming, and wish you the best and have a great day. And we'll hope we can get you back here soon.
Okay. Thanks, Gary. Great talking with you. It's been fun.
Thank you.